This weekend interview is powered by Precision Fuel and Hydration. I've been using their products for years. I was thinking today when I first started using them, can't remember exact date, but I've ran my fastest marathons. 2 of my last 3 marathons have been my fastest, and I've had Precision 90-gram gels in the side of my half tights. And I love how I can have 90 grams of carbs in my half tights, one each leg, 180 total, and be able to get a stack of fuel down. So it's powered by Precision Fuel and Hydration. Chances are that you're gearing up for a race yourself, but how dialed in is your race day nutrition? Precision Fuel and Hydration makes it simple with a free online planner. So you can go to their website, precisionhydration.com, and while you're there, place your first order and you get 15% off when you use the code IRP2026.
This week's guest competed at 3 Olympic Games, 5 World Cross Country Championships, 2 Commonwealth Games, 1 Track and Field World Championship, and a World Half Marathon Championship. She also won national titles in the 10,000 metres, marathon, and cross country. Since retiring from the sport, she's gone on to be a national team manager, as well as holding other roles with Australian athletics. Welcome to the Inside Riding Podcast, Susan Hobson.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Brad.
No, thanks for giving up some time, and congratulations on a fantastic career. That's a lot of national teams there.
It is. You'd know Brian Linton, but I never used to really keep count of national teams or things like that, but Brian did. He would always remind me of how many national teams I'd made, and back then in the 90s, apparently I had made more national teams than any other female. But part of that was opportunities.
Yeah.
Like there was national teams to be made, and some of those opportunities like Ekiden relays and even World Cross Championships every year, they've changed.
Yeah. One thing that stood out for me was, like most people we interview, they tend to compete at more World Track and Field Championships than they do Olympic Games. But it looks like you went to 3 Olympics, but only 1 Track and Field World Championships. Why was that?
Babies, in a nutshell. So my Olympic career went Olympics, baby, Olympics, baby, Olympics.
Yeah, okay.
So obviously with both the pregnancy and then coming back to full fitness, and I can tell you I was nowhere near as quick as, say, Jess Trengrove or Jess Stenson or Jen Lacar's in coming back. I was more like 9, 10, 11 months before I felt I was getting back to full fitness. So you're taking out a big chunk of time between the Olympic Games, and that's the main reason. And particularly if I may have been focusing on the marathon, well, to be pregnant, to have your baby, to get back to fitness and fit enough to run a marathon that would then qualify you for the next world champ. So it was just more a timing thing. I would never turn up my nose at the opportunity to compete at a world championship. It was mainly a timing issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's kick off. We'll go through your PBs and correct me if they're wrong, and just if you can think back to these races, anything that stands out. We'll start with the 3K. Got here at 8:56, set in Canberra in 1992.
Yeah, and that was when there was a really healthy domestic series in Canberra. They were known as Seco meets or Coca-Cola meets or something. So that was the regular one around the Australia Day weekend in Canberra, where I ran a 3K.
Yep.
I think the interesting thing about that race, so that was 1992 or
yep.
1?
Yeah, 2, I think.
2. And I was having a good summer season. I think that was, in that particular race, it actually clicked with me finally that I could be competitive with the group I was competing with all the time, like Carolyn Swallow, Jenny Lunn, Krishna Stanton.
Yeah.
And we did, we'd race head to head often. And, we did often share the wins around, but it was that race. I remember Jenny saying to me, I came into the home straight and then found the other gear. And she did a double take because it was the first time I'd done that to her.
Yeah.
So it actually took me a long time, I think, to find that top gear, but it's a confidence thing.
Yeah. That same year, you ran 15:33 for 5,000 metres over in Wellington.
I did, in windy Wellington. It was a very windy day. I went over that year and did a series of races, Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland, over 3 or 5K. And basically I was only ever racing one other person, Erin, whose last name I can't even think of now. She was a very good Kiwi triathlete who became a good track runner. And it was her and I out the front in each race. So that race, I did sort of wallop her. So I just led from the front into the wind. And I always felt I could have improved that time, but it wasn't. 3K was still the main distance then.
Yeah, okay.
It was only 96 Olympics that it changed to 5K from 3K. So I just didn't actually run that many of them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then, your 10,000 metre PB, 31:54, 1996 over in Japan in, is it Mito?
Mito, yes.
Yeah.
That's famous because that's where Pat Johnson set the Australian record.
Yes. That was like, 2003, I think he did that.
Yeah.
Maybe around that,
So
yeah.
that's a small city north of Tokyo. I might as well tell you the story of how all this came about.
Yep.
So after I'd had our first son, Riley, in mid-95, I wasn't even sure whether I was going to get fit again, continue with elite level training and racing. But I definitely wanted to get fit again. After you've been pregnant and had a baby, all you want to do is get your body back into decent shape again. So I was doing that, and we were living in O'Connor, up on O'Connor Ridge. So when I got to a sort of a certain level of fitness, I thought, okay, I'm going to start doing some track sessions. So I'd jog up from home up to the AOS track with my spikes and just started playing around with a few, pretty short, easy-ish track sessions. What I didn't know was Dick Telford was then head coach at the AIS because Pat Hesse, who had been my coach up until that, till I had Riley really in 95, he had retired and moved to Brisbane. So I technically didn't really have a coach. Anyway, I didn't realise Dick was sort of keeping an eye on me. And one day at the end of a session, he came down and he said, I've seen you out here the last few weeks. You're looking all right. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm just trying to get fit again. And he said, do you want to have a real crack? Would you like me to help you have a real crack at making Atlanta? So we did. And Dick then coached me for roughly the next basically until I got pregnant again with Cassidy. And he was the one, he felt I was getting fit enough to put out a decent 10K. And we went up to Sydney to do that Suzanne 10K series that they had around the country in the 90s.
Yeah.
Or Sydney and Melbourne anyway. We went up and did the Sydney one and I won, but I also knocked off 3 of the girls who'd already been selected for the Atlanta Olympics. And he said, okay, how about you go to Mito? There's a 10K there and see if you can qualify. So I did that.
Very good. So it's amazing that you were contemplating, quitting the sport after one Olympics and then you went to another 2. So it's.
I think it's because it wasn't so common then to have a child and get back. Yeah. It certainly wasn't nearly as common as it is now. Almost taken for granted now.
Yeah, actually,
a few people had done it. The standout for me was Liz McColgan, who had done it. I think there was also a bit of I'd been to Olympic Games. I'd been to, then 2 Commonwealth Games by the time I had Riley. I'd been to 5 World Cross Country Championships. There was, a bit of this thought, maybe I've done it. Maybe I've done it.
Yeah.
It's now time to have a family and get on. But the itch was still there.
Yeah. Actually, it was one of my questions later on in the interview was about how, it's really common now for mums to be competing and, competing into their 40s. And, here you were doing it almost a trailblazer. I believe you were 42 when you ran the marathon at the Sydney Olympics.
Yeah. And I was, that was old then. By today's standards, not so, because of courtesy of Lisa and Sinead, but it definitely was then old.
Yeah.
So, back to that Mito race. They had basically selected that was in the May, and they'd basically selected the team for Atlanta. They'd already selected Kylie Risk for the 10K, so there was spots there, and you could qualify late. But what they did is I got a phone call from the president of Athletics Australia at the time, the week before I was leaving, and I was told that back then the qualifying time for the 10K was 32:30 for women. He said, you're qualifying late, so the qualifying time's going to be 32 minutes flat. And it was no consideration as to why I had a break from the sport to have a child. It was almost like I was a naughty girl for not running nationals and qualifying the regular way. So we're going to make it harder for you.
But was that the president just going out on his own and making a call? There was no selection committee?
I actually can't recall whether anyone else who qualified late, and I don't even recall how many of them there may have been, had the same treatment.
Yeah.
I know Chris Wardlaw was furious, and he said, how dare they change the goalposts? Anyway, so I went over there, and Mito is renowned for being windy, and it was windy, but I was really fortunate because there was a group of about 4 Japanese girls who were strong, and we basically ran in a pack and shared the lead, and I think 3 of us all ran under 32 minutes that night, so I was pretty lucky.
Half marathon year later, so 1997 in Yamaguchi, 70:31.
Yes, so that was just one of those invitations I got. And because I was, at that stage I was gearing towards more marathon running than 10K on the track, which in hindsight, 10K was my event, not marathon. But anyway, that's the way I was heading. And I thought this would be a really good half marathon to do. I loved racing in Japan. It was very convenient once I had children because you could go later, same time zone, wasn't a huge trip, always so well looked after, races put on, to perfection. Loved racing there. And it was a great race and I won it. It's just the same thing. I pulled away about halfway and was just sort of a bit gobsmacked, I think, when no one came with me.
Yeah.
So I just kept going.
And then the marathon, I had a look, like you ran 2:32 quite a few times.
Just about.
Yeah. Your official PBs from Osaka in 2000, but you also ran 2:32 in Canberra.
Yeah, my PB from my debut in Canberra in 1994 to Sydney only improved by 20 seconds. Yeah. And probably my Canberra marathon was my best marathon. And when you consider that Canberra's got a bit of altitude, back then it wasn't a super flat course. It was the Parliament House Hill, but also out to Western Park and back. So it was pretty undulating.
Was that a 2-lap one, like starting and finishing at like Talopia there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, if you took that into consideration, then it probably definitely was my best marathon, but it also felt my best.
And no female has ever run a faster marathon in Canberra, I don't believe. Still think you're the fastest time
I'm ahead by a couple of minutes still, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's impressive. So let's get into how you got involved with the sport. I read somewhere that you started running like relatively late compared to other people.
That's true. If we go back to my school days in the 70s, the early 70s, when I was at high school, I could go out and win the 800 at the school carnival and the cross country at the school carnival and go and represent at the zone and ACT. And I didn't train. I was a netballer. I mainly played netball. I think the big difference was there wasn't that many girls training as middle distance or distance runners then. So no one actually sort of approached me, tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, you could be probably quite good at this. Do you want to train? That just never happened. But I knew I had like good aerobic capacity. I knew I could run reasonably well. Went off to uni in Wollongong. And they, I don't know how familiar you are with Wollongong, but it sits under that huge escarpment, Mount Kira.
Yeah.
And one of the annual events at, well, it was then Wollongong Institute of Education, was the run to the summit, which was more of a climb. And in our cohort of about 50 people, there was one other girl who actually trained as a distance runner. And across the 4 years of students, she would always win and I would always come second. And again, I wasn't training then. So I always knew I had this aerobic capacity. And then, but I was at uni. We drank a lot. We partied a lot. If I ran 10 minutes down to the beach, that was a big run. Played netball. I had a year in Perth in 1983. I wanted to do an extra year of study at UWA over there. And I was, because I had this 4-year diploma, could see the writing on the wall that I needed a degree. So I went over there to get my degree. We had a lecturer, I was doing a Bachelor of Human Movement. We had a lecturer, Alan Moore, who he was a bit of a rugby man, but he just loved exercise physiology. It was his absolute passion. And he put us all through these aerobic work capacity tests. And I did mine. And when I finished, he just looked at me and he said, so what do you do? And I said, what do you mean, what do I do? He said, what's your sport? What do you train at? And I said, nothing. I play some netball and I occasionally go for a 20-minute run. And he said, no, you must be doing more than that. You've got a really good aerobic capacity. So that, I guess, reinforced what I'd vaguely always known. Following year, I went back to teach in Wagga, where I had been teaching for the 3 years before I went to Perth, and just happened to live over the road from a guy who was a pretty keen club runner. And he said, look, we go for a group run every Saturday morning, come and join us. So I started doing that year. And then I started during the week. I played a heap of social sport, social touch football, volleyball, you name it. I started just jogging down to netball training, which I still played semi-seriously, and I think touch training, and just realised how much I was enjoying running. And then the following year in 85, that was when I moved back to Canberra. I really wanted to come back home, transferred to the ACT department, and that was the key moment.
And how old were you at this point?
I turned 27 that year.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
So I was 26 when I moved back, turned 27 in the March. Now, if I'd stayed in Wagga, I'm pretty sure I would never have become a runner. But the key to being in Canberra, and that's one of the things you probably wanted to talk about, is what was it like in the 80s and 90s training in Canberra?
Well, yeah, and also how did you, I suppose when you moved back to Canberra, how did you then get sort of going from just recreational running to in an elite setup with Pat Clohessy?
So, well, I'll tell you a little story how it really started, and it was only my first week back in Canberra, and I opened the Canberra Times. I was at my parents' place and just opened the Canberra Times and saw this tiny little ad for this thing called the Jog Along on a Tuesday night out in Stromlo Forest. And I thought, I might go and do that. Anyway, so I turned up. I had no idea it was a handicap race. So I turned up and I knew it was 6K, and they said, so you've got to give us the time it's going to take you that you think to finish, because we've got to handicap you. And I thought, I've got no idea. And I thought, 4-minute Ks sounds all right. I said 24 minutes. And a lot of people at the table near me just looked at me and stared at me, and they must have thought,
She's dreaming.
yeah, exactly, she's dreaming. And the other thing that happened was, so John Gilbert and Sue Gilbert was the real driver of the jog along back then in Canberra. John, his wife, they were there, and he heard me speak and he recognised my voice because John had actually taught me senior history at Canberra High. But I'd been away out of town for the last 9 years. And so he sort of said, "Oh, Susan, do you run these days?" And he was quite excited. Anyway, we took off on the jog along, and I was obviously the last one to leave. And I couldn't even see in front of me the person before me. So I just took off like a scared rabbit, and I was just really sure I was going to embarrass myself by saying I could do this in 24 minutes. So I just ran really hard and just snuck in under 24 minutes. Then I'd been noticed, and that's how I got sort of put in touch with a guy called Jeff Moore. I don't know whether you know Jeff.
I know the name.
He was coaching. He had a decent group from North Canberra Athletics Club, and I joined North Canberra Athletics Club, and I worked with Jeff for probably 2 years, 85, 86 into 87. He was the one who taught me what training is all about, what regular training looks like and what you need to do. So those 2 years I was just gradually building a foundation, gradually improving, fining down a little bit because I was carrying a bit of extra weight for a runner then. And then during 87, Pat Clohessy noticed me and started to notice my results. I had a bit of a breakthrough race, my first track race in 1987 over 3K. I think I'd gone from 10 minutes plus down to 9:26 or something in one race. And he noticed me, and just not too long after that, towards the end of the year, he said, "Would you like to start coming and training with my AIS squad?" And that's how I started training with Pat Clow. And then the following year, he was able to get me an AIS scholarship, which I think I stayed on for the next 5 years.
And who were the athletes in that sort of AIS squad being coached by Chloe at the time?
So Krishna Stanton was around then. There was a couple of other more local girls. Actually, they were both from Yass. Angela Lachetti and Wendy Ticehurst. Can't remember the exact years they were in the squad, but they came into the squad for a couple of years. There was sometimes a few visiting athletes who'd come up and train for a while, like Marie McDonough. Krishna was probably the main training partner, and Angela. We would also go off like Mondays, Wednesdays, warm-ups and cool-downs. We'd often head off as a big group, men and women. And they never ran all that fast in their warm-ups or their long runs, so we would keep up with them.
Yeah.
But actual sessions, Galen Clues was often in and out of our sessions, but they would be the main ones.
And what did a standard week of training look like under Pat?
Probably pretty familiar to what a lot still do, and that is, we'll say if you start with the Sunday long run, Monday recovery run, but
just on the long run, how long were you running for your long runs, like throughout your career? Like, were you one of those people that was 2.5 hours like most Sundays, or was it 2 hours?
Only 2.5 hours when I was training for a marathon specifically. Otherwise, it'd be 2 hours plus. But it took me, I reckon it took me from 85 to 92 2:93 to build up to that 2 hour plus run. It was just a gradually, like initially my long run was an hour.
Yeah.
And then every year it just got longer and longer and longer. And it was when I decided I wanted to have a crack at marathons. It went 2 hours plus, obviously, because
Yeah.
you need to do that.
Yes, that's Sunday, Monday.
Monday recovery run, and again, same thing. Monday, while it had always been an easy run, usually with strides at the end of the session and often then a gym strength and conditioning session. Recovery runs blew out over the years to a 10 miler, 16K on the Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday session, morning run, morning short easy run, afternoon session. Thursdays were generally the track session, so Tuesday could be anything depending whether summer, winter, fartlek, hills, tempo, depends. Generally through my career, I would only do one track session a week.
Okay.
Even when I was running 10Ks on the track.
Was Wednesday sort of a midweek long run?
Yep, medium long run. Same thing over the years, that just kept growing and growing. And by the time I was training for marathons, it was like an hour 45, 25K. Thursday, track session. Friday for a while was just a recovery run. Towards the end of my career, when I was still training for marathons, I often had Friday as a non-running day. And that was because I was conscious of my age. So up until I had children, I was definitely running 7 days a week. It was after I had Riley, I think I started experimenting a bit with having Friday, and I would do a really hard swim. But not every week. But I was conscious of my age, and I thought, I'm getting close to 40, I'm over 40, my body probably doesn't recover as well, I need to change something. And it did sort of work, I think.
Yep.
The other thing that I did most of my career is I only doubled 5 days a week. I never doubled on a Wednesday or a Sunday. But what I would do those days is have a 30-minute swim. So swimming was pretty regular. I'm no world champion swimmer, but I was capable of swimming 30 minutes and doing, breaking it up into some intervals up and down the pool. So I did that pretty regularly throughout my career.
Yep.
Wednesdays and Sundays.
So Saturday would have been another session?
Saturday session. Often that was a race, but low key. And this was the beauty of Canberra. Really strong athletics club structure then, like there was half a dozen very strong clubs. So I could go out, Interclub was big, not like it is now. I could go out to Interclub on a Saturday afternoon and jump in a 1,500 or a 3K, and they were the main ones I would do. And they would grade them. So I'd generally jump into the B grade race and I'd have a group of men around me to run that race. Winter season, obviously, there was cross-country races every weekend. There was a good cross-country race, and I would just do it as a hard training session.
Yeah, right. So you're doing that most weekends?
Most weekends, yep. And then if I wasn't, sometimes, it would be a session, probably more of a tempo over the hills.
Yeah. And with your long runs, obviously they would have been out at Stromlo, I take it. And did the elite guys and yourself run those long runs together, or did the guys take off? Or
so there was when I very first started going out there was the pack, as it was called. They would start at the Lenton's house in Duffy, and there was this little dirt road between Duffy through sort of some bushland between where they lived in Duffy and Deek Drive, and we would wait there at 9 o'clock. So quite a few would go to the Lenton's place, quite a few would just go and park at Deeks Drive and wait there, and you'd just see this pack running through. and then we'd just latch on. And, you know, for the first probably 20, 30 minutes, it was a pretty sedate pace, and it really was a pack, and then it would start to break up a bit. That's one thing that stands out with me with Deek, Mona. I've done long runs, 2.5 hour runs with Deek and Mona, and haven't been stretched a 4-minute K pace by any means. They ran at 4.5-minute K pace often for their long runs.
Yeah, okay. Did they ever get rolling over the hills at any point, or it was
Sometimes,
always
sometimes, yeah. I mean, and I've got a memory when I was training for my first marathon here in Canberra. There was a number of times I ended up doing the whole long run with Deek, and he was great because he would give me lots of advice, but he was the one that said one of the really valuable things you can do with your long run when you're training for a marathon is pick up this last half hour. And I would do that with him. And I would often try and do that, you know, in my long Sunday run.
Yeah, right. You've had a couple of really high-profile coaches in Pat and Dick. Like, how would you compare and contrast those two coaches?
I guess the real difference is you could say that Pat coached as an art, feeling a sense of what worked without necessarily going right into the science of why. Dick is definitely a scientist. So he's coming from the other end where a lot of his programs is based on, and he's obviously got an amazing understanding of physiology, based on how he sees the physiology playing out in your training program. What I feel really fortunate about is I've drawn from both of those.
Yeah.
And while their programs probably don't look hugely different, they were a little bit different. Little bit more intensity probably in Dick's program. I remember Chloe would all, you know, there's lots of Chloisms that people will tell you, but just roll through it. If you weren't feeling great or really tired, he'd say, just back off. He was very much a coach where you were encouraged to listen to your body, and but at the same time, he would let you know when we are really going for it today. This is a hard session. Actually, that's another thing when we talk back about training partners, because Dick in Canberra at that stage was coaching, and he coached Carol and Schwallow, Andrew Lloyd, Lisa and Deaky, and they were all based in Canberra. Lisa not all the year, but for parts of it. We often did a mile session on 4 by a mile on the track, and Krishna, Carol and Lisa and I would do that together and just share the leads. And they were generally tough sessions, but I can really recall both Dick and Pat at times during those sessions would say, you're running, it's got to be controlled.
Yeah.
So there was always these parameters around it.
Yeah, okay.
Our friends at Precision Fuel and Hydration have written a number of articles on their knowledge hub over on their website, and one of them talks about the success coming down to mastering the 3 levers of endurance. That's carbs, fluids and sodium. Essentially, it talks about knowing your numbers and how you just can't wing it. You need to know your hourly carb target, whether that's 60 or 90 grams, and exactly how much salt you're losing. Precision has the tools to take the guesswork out, especially with their 90 gram gels to hit those big carb numbers, and their high strength electrolytes to match your specific sweat rate. Don't leave your race to chance. Head to precision.com to read their latest guide on the 3 levers and build your free fuel and hydration plan today. And don't forget, place your first order and you'll get 15% off when you use the code IRP2026.
Let's maybe touch on a few of your career highlights. So let's go 92. You finished 16th at the World Cross Country Championships in Boston, and then 21st at the Olympics that year in the 10K. And what a lot of people won't realise is back then there were actually heats of the 10K and then a final, which
heat and a final 6 days apart
is unheard of now. Like that must have added an extra element in your training. Like you often see now these guys that maybe a pure 5K runners that'll step up to the 10K because it's just a straight final and hopefully it's a tactical one and they can use their kit. But you needed to be aerobically really strong, obviously, to get through two 10K
and I guess,
races.
That's why the half marathon racing was important. And the training that was probably looking, even though I might not have been doing 2.5 hour runs on a Sunday when I was training for 92, 96 of those 10Ks, it was a marathon style program in a way with some of the fast track work.
Yeah.
Because obviously your goal is to make the final and you needed to be able to back up. So Barcelona, there was 51 or something like that across the two heats. And unfortunately I came 21st and only 20 made the final. So Barcelona I just missed.
Yeah.
But Atlanta I did make the final of the 10K.
And World Cross, finishing like 16th at World Cross is a phenomenal result given it's, at that time it's one of the hardest races in the world.
Yeah.
Every country can send 6 athletes. So you must have been happy with that result.
I was very happy. That was in snow too. That was when Boston decided to dump a foot of snow about 3 days out from the race. I'd had a really good track season, few PBs. I guess I was confident. And there's a photo of the start, and that's when Athletics Australia were putting us in these disgusting lime green Saucony kit. And we started down in a sort of a bit of a valley that race and ran up the hill, and someone had obviously taken a photo and I was there right across the front. So I think I was in the top 10, but more around 8, 9, 10 for a fair part of the race. And then I actually got really cold. Because it was very cold. I had gloves on. I had a bodysuit underneath my singlet and shorts, but I actually don't think I had enough clothing on. And I did get a bit cold. And I think that probably affected the last part of my race. And when I look back at the photos, we were caught out a bit, but a lot of the girls had long sleeves underneath and some were running in tights, and I probably should have gone down that path.
Yeah. 96, as you said, 17th in the Olympic 10,000 metre final. Any sort of fond memories of the Atlanta Olympics?
It was my best performance. It was when I was running at my best, I think. It was a great team. It was a really good, fun team. I've got very fond memories of those Olympics because everything just seemed to be really positive.
Yeah.
I did run out of time because in terms of coming back from getting fit after Riley, he was 12 months old and I'd made it there, but I actually ran a 5K PB in the heat of the 10K. So we went through in 15:30 in the heat.
Yeah, okay.
And I saw it and I thought, oh, that's my 5K PB, unofficial.
Because that was hot too, Atlanta, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was hot and humid. But no, it would have been great to have had a few more months under my belt of training, but I can't complain. Against the odds, I felt I sort of got there and made it. So I was pretty happy.
I think it's impressive to finish 17th at the Olympics a year after giving birth. It's incredible. And then Sydney Olympics, like obviously going out, I suppose, at a home Olympics
Yeah,
and competing in an event, the marathon, where you get to pass so many spectators. Like, what was that experience like? I'm sure the result wasn't what
it
you wanted,
was.
but
No, the result was far from what I wanted. It was just so memorable, and I've often been asked about that race and talked about that race. And what I will say, it was the best race and the worst race I've ever had in the one race. It was the worst race because I took an injury into it. I was 42. I had this niggling hamstring insertion, and look, the physios and team doctors had said to me, it's not going to come good by the time of your race, but obviously you've got a choice. You either run or you don't. And obviously, I was going to run. It hampered me, and it just tightened up more and more and more through the race. I could still run. I could still run pretty well. It just took the edge off. So I was pretty disappointed, particularly as we'd been living in Perth for the 12 months leading into the Sydney Olympics. We moved over there for Alan to take up a principal's position, and we arrived in Perth. Cassidy was 9 months old. Riley was 4, didn't know anyone, and I'd decided I was going to have a crack at the Sydney Olympics. So we often laugh and he was foundation principal, so he was starting a new school from scratch over there. We often just say, how did we actually survive those 12 months? Because we both had our big goals and challenges we were working towards. But we did it, and with a lot of help. I employed a nanny, and that's how I did it. Yeah. And we managed. So I forget what the train of thought was leading into that. I was doing a lot of racing. I had to jump on a plane every month to get decent competition once I was competitive again, to come back east and race.
Yeah, okay.
And then they put the city to surf in the July that year to avoid the Olympics, and I ran it, and that was the year I won it. And in that race, I thought, this hamstring's really tight. And basically it didn't get better between July and September. It was just niggling away. I could train, I could get through the work, I could get the miles done. It's just like, I guess there was this tiny little handbrake always on.
Yeah.
So obviously I went into that race with that injury, and hugely disappointed because I'd been imagining this, running an Olympic marathon, home Olympics, home crowd. I'd often visualise as a way of motivating myself. I was doing nearly all my long runs. For 12 months, I basically did long runs by myself. That's how I would motivate myself in the long run, by imagining myself running into the Olympic Stadium and imagining all these really positive things. So it was disappointing to start that race, but at the same time, it was hugely uplifting because home crowd.
Yeah.
And my memory is running through the streets of Sydney, and obviously there'd been programs printed in newspapers, because while some people on the sidelines were calling out, "Go Aussie," most people were calling out, "Go Susan," because they had seen the field and so they knew who I was. And that was just amazing. Plus, friends and family scattered through the course. I think the best one was we came back into Hyde Park, 20 plus, maybe 25K, and then you'd head out west to Homebush over the bridges and the hills. And a group of my university friends were there. Now, I'd finished uni 20 years before, but we were a close-knit group. They had made this huge sign on a full-size double-bed sheet that just said, "Go Hobbo." And they saw me coming up past Hyde Park, and because they'd been waiting for, an hour, I suppose, all the people around them were saying, "Who's Hobbo?" So they told the story. So by the time I got there, not only did they sort of jump out with this huge sign saying, "Go Hobbo," there was probably 100 people there who yelled out, "Go Hobbo." Most of them I didn't know except my
Yeah,
uni friends.
that's
But
cool.
it was the support that made it so special.
Yeah,
And then I finally got to the stadium and I was relieved to have made it to the finish, to have been able to do it, and disappointed because I knew that my position was probably in the 30s, where I was hoping to crack a top 20 at least. And, I was even, I think, feeling a little bit emotional as I ran down the tunnel and into the stadium. And I knew that I knew they'd have a full stadium because they had morning events, and I knew quite a few family and friends had bought tickets. But I was sort of, I guess, a bit embarrassed. What I didn't know, and Karen had finished. I didn't know Nikki had pulled out. So I was actually the second Australian. I wasn't aware of that. So I ran into the stadium and it was just these mixed emotions: relief, little bit proud to finish an Olympic marathon, disappointment. But then the home crowd, they just stood up and gave me this sort of standing ovation around the track. And it was just like, so uplifting. It was amazing.
yeah. I don't think you can ever be embarrassed. You earned your spot. You got to the finish line. I think it's
Yeah.
well done. Obviously, the sport has changed so much since you were
Yes.
competing, especially over the marathon with like shoes and nutrition. Can you talk us through? Were you taking on any nutrition on your long runs when you're training for a marathon? And what did your race day nutrition look like in marathons?
So, first question, no. Water was what we had during our long runs. Actual marathon racing, we didn't use gels. I don't think they were even a thing then, but just the whatever your favourite sports drink was, Gatorade, Powerade, whatever. Dick had taken us through the right concentrations to have. Sydney Marathon, I'd been working a bit with Louise Burke and she'd suggested I try flat Coke for the last couple of drink stations, and I had tried that in training leading in. So that's what I did. But I think I was in such a bad way, didn't make much impact.
Yeah.
But that was it. Uh,
Certainly different. It's
yeah,
changed so much.
yeah. So nutrition's come ahead in leaps and bounds, not just uh, during race nutrition, the whole package, I
Yeah.
think, has really improved because now I knew I had to eat protein and I sort of had a pretty sensible balanced diet, plenty of carbs, some protein, but not the same focus you now get on protein, which makes so much sense when you think of the micro tissue damage you do every time you run.
Yeah, yeah. Back then, like in terms of making a living from the sport, like you mentioned before that you go over to New Zealand for these races, you go over to Japan and win a half marathon. Were you being sponsored to a level that you could actually go full time?
Yeah, I was lucky that I always had a sponsor. Oh, well, sort of once I got reasonable. So I think from 1988 onwards, I had a sponsor, and it sort of went Brooks, then Adidas, then New Balance. It sort of changed after each baby when
Yeah,
I'd had a break. They would provide me. I didn't get money from them. I'd get little rewards if I did well. I wasn't on a money contract. They would give me just as much gear as I liked.
yeah,
But I was really fortunate because I was on an AIS scholarship for about 5 years, and they paid you an allowance because I was living at home, not living in, because
yeah,
we come from Canberra. So I had this allowance for a lot of my career. I never had to, after the first couple of years, I was never ever out of pocket to go anywhere to race or compete. That was all looked after by funding, AIS funding, or the race directors pay you way.
yeah,
After I had Riley, it was. I didn't want to go back to full-time teaching. And then once I decided I wanted to keep running, that really influenced my decision to do some marathon running. I think I ran the Canberra Marathon, and it was my debut, and it turned out to be a good one. I always thought, well, if I can do that in my debut, what can I do? But it didn't really work out that way. It was a way of making a living running marathons. I could go to Japan. I ran quite a few in Japan, but even I've won Gold Coast, Melbourne, Canberra, the Sydney Olympic trial. They all carried pretty decent prize money then.
Yeah. And was there appearance money for these like overseas marathons as well?
Overseas money would pay you appearance money and prize money.
Yep.
The other thing I was doing during the mid-90s is I sort of had two managers. Dave Cundy was my real manager who got me sponsorship, but I also had Derek Frood, Lewis Posso from Posso Sports. They would do all my international races, and they were able to, get me into races. And they got me quite a few jobs pacemaking half marathons, which was when I had kids, which was a very doable thing. Jump on a plane, only get there a couple of days beforehand, pace the half marathon, give you 5,000 US, home you come.
Yeah.
So that worked.
That's good.
Lewis was always, he was really keen. Once I turned 40, he was really keen for me to go over and live in the States for 6 months, because he said, you will clean up the Masters.
And they still have it. They have like an over 40s prize pool for like New York Marathon and things like that.
And there was good money to be made. And he said, why don't you just come over here for 6 months? Live here, you'll make lots of money, you'll have a great time. But the problem was Alan got a job in Perth, so it was never an option. And a young baby, like a 4-year-old and under 12 months old, it just wasn't really an option.
Before we move on to things that you've done outside of your own running within the sport, is there anything that you would have changed with your running career, whether it be training or any regrets?
I think not real regrets. I think what I would change is once I had children, so even after Riley, I was doing most of my training by myself. And that, again, it was a logistical thing. When after Riley was born and I was starting to get fit again, I employed a nanny to come for 2 hours of a morning to our house, because going and meeting the group to train at 5 p.m, it's a terrible time with young kids. It's arsenic hour.
Yep.
And they need feeding. So I would just do it of a morning. And basically that was from end of 95 onwards, when I was training seriously again. I was doing a lot of my running by myself. Definitely when we moved to Perth, I made a point of finding a group, and once a week I would go into town of an afternoon and do a Tuesday night session with them. But too much of my running was by myself. And I knew we'd go into it, like we went into the team camp leading into the Sydney Olympics. We had a month at Noosa and then 2 weeks in Brisbane. And I was fit, but my fitness actually went even higher just in that 6-week period of training day in, day out with people.
Yeah.
So that would be something I would just, if I had my time again, I would just make it work to do that more regularly.
I saw on your Facebook that you were over at last year's World Championships in Tokyo, and you said that it was your 13th Global Athletics Championships, but the first purely as a spectator. So you've been like a team manager at Olympic Commonwealth Games. Like how many teams have you been a manager on, and what did that entail?
So I was track and field. I was actual team manager from 89, 99, 2009, 10, 11, 12. So Berlin World Championships, each one leading through to the London Olympics. That's when I was sort of the team manager. Before that, I'd done the 2006 Com Games in Melbourne I was actually a team coach, distance coach for that team. 2018, I was just part of team management for the Gold Coast. And I'd done early on, and this is probably how my team management started, I'd done a couple of Ekerdens way back in the early 2000s. And that was just because Brian Rowe picked up the phone one day and said, would you be interested in going with this Ekerden relay? And I said, I would, but I need more than 3 weeks' notice because I, young family. And eventually he worked out I would do it, but they had to ask me a bit earlier. So I did a few Ekerdens, and then I also did a few World Cross Countries when we were in Melbourne. I was team leader for 2017 and 2019 World Cross Country, and I loved that because World Cross Country was my favourite event. I was good at it, and I loved the team aspect of it because you're there as a group, you train at the same time, you compete at the same time. It's the most like a team that you can be, whereas track and field global championships, everyone's coming and going and have got races and training at different times. So I loved World Cross Country, so I really enjoyed being team leader of those teams.
And can you remember any of the major challenges that you had at a major championship where, like, I don't know, like you're under the pump, like somebody forgot something or...
I remember the very first night I felt like I was thrown in the deep end. So it was my first time as team manager for the 2009 World Championships in Berlin, and it was the first night of competition. So we'd had our team camp in Cologne for about 10 days, moved in, first night of competition, got through it, doing all the things we needed to do, all the admin and the juggling of accreditations and everything you needed to do to make each night work. Went and got on the bus, and it was about 11 p.m. to head back to the team hotel. And Craig Hilliard came and got on the bus because he just was one of the last ones to walk out, and he just sort of beckoned for me to come towards him. And I went up and he said, we need to go back inside. There's been a protest. So Brendan Cole, 400-metre hurdler, had apparently been DQ'd for his trail leg trailing too much out over the hurdle. So we went back in. We're really lucky. Matty Beckenham who was his coach, had actually videoed the whole race, and he was able to get that taken away. But you've got 30 minutes from the time the DQ's made. You've got 30 minutes to put in your appeal and hand over $100. So Nathan Sims was always my assistant team manager. Fabulous. Couldn't have asked for a better person to work with over those 4 years. And so we each would have $100 in our pocket in case of an appeal. But he was still on the bus and went back to the team hotel with the athletes. I went in. Craig Hilliard was there who helped me with the appeal, and I was really lucky to see Brian Rowe on the other side of the bench because he was working in that section. We're just working through it, just got to the end, and he handed me another piece of paper. He said, you might need another $100. I'll go and get it for you, which he shouldn't have done, but he did. Jeff Risley had been DQ'd for a bit of rough and tumble in the 1500 heat. Same thing, we won that appeal, but I was just like, is every night going to be like this? Now, they are actually the only 2 appeals in my whole management career I've ever had. First night ever as team manager, first 2 within 30 minutes, and luckily we won them both.
It must be a nice role to have to sort of, obviously you're not competing anymore, but to have an impact on, the current generation.
It is. Look, and because obviously I'm passionate about athletics, there's still genuine buzz of being a part of these teams, but you feel like you're doing something useful, and you feel like you can draw on some of your experience of what, what worked well and what didn't work well, to help that team and help people in that team. And I think that did work for me because team members knew I'd been an athlete, so they knew that I got it.
Yeah.
And I think that helped me if, you're having conversations with them or trying to help them in any way. But yeah, look, and there was other challenges. We had some rat bag athletes. I mean, in Delhi, a fridge was thrown over the balcony. In London, some of the boys who'd finished early emptied their bean bags into the courtyards. We have issues in camps when they were mucking up and not turning up for drug tests or outfittings. You always had your rat bags.
So in that instance, are you the one that has to discipline them, or you sort of just pass it up the chain?
I discipline depends on the team.
Yeah, okay.
Com Games and Olympics, you do the initial discipline, but generally that would be then passed on for AOC or Commonwealth Games to decide what should happen.
Yeah.
World Champs, it was AA that would decide what would happen. It was. Yeah.
I also noticed that you've had another role with AA as like coach mentor. What does that involve?
So AA has really invested in probably the last 4 or 5 years. Since COVID, they've really invested in coach education and coach support, and particularly for developing elite level coaches. So there's basically 2 programs. One is the coach mentoring. Well, I'm involved in both actually, but the coach mentoring program, basically a coach, if they've had an athlete they're coaching who's reached a certain level, which is usually qualified for World Juniors, that's often a benchmark, they can be invited into this coach mentoring program. And this year, I think there's about 15 of us. I've been doing it for 2 years now, and the last 2 years I've had 4 coaches, nearly all middle distance coaches, although at the moment I've got one of my ones this year is actually a sprints coach. And you're basically there. They can guide the direction they want to take with you as a mentor, but we also have plenty that we can work with. And, I would, if nothing specific is coming from my mentees that they want to do, I will look at things like their communication with their athletes, the culture in their squad, coach behaviours, issues around coaching like poaching. We look at more technical things like tapering. We talk about specific sessions.
Yeah.
We talk about specific issues athletes are having, and you're providing advice, but you're also a sounding board, because as a mentor, you don't really want to be telling them what to do. You want to be helping guide them so they are making the decisions.
And can they contact you whenever they like, or you have set times per year that you meet up with them?
Well, it's semi-structured. So the way, and each of us who are coach mentors, it's up to us how we structure it. Apart from the fact that you do meet them regularly, so you interpret what you want. And some of the coach mentors are actually in the same location as their mentees, so they can have face-to-face contact often, whereas I will travel. I've got a budget to travel and see them in their home coaching environment. I will generally, way I operate with the individuals, once a month we'll have an hour online, and I often give them something specific to think about for that session, and we may or may not get to it. It depends if they have something they want to talk about and look into. And then once a month we have a group session, and they're the ones that, they tell me and I find are really valuable, because you've got this little group of coaches who are getting to know each other, providing support for each other. Each group session, we have a bit of a theme or a topic, and I give that in advance so that they're prepared to share their ideas, and they find that really valuable. But what it's really doing is it's giving them a little network, and that's the real value, I think, in these education programs, coach programs AA's set up. It's the networks and support that coaches are developing.
We should probably take a step back and, when did you get into coaching yourself? Because I guess that's how we met, like 28,
Yes.
28 years ago. Like when did you start coaching?
Well, I was offered the AIS in the 90s had what was called a scholarship coaching program for each of the main sports that were at the AIS at the time. So I was track and field scholarship coach. And I started in 93. I started sort of mid-year in 93. But because when I started, it was Pat Clohessie's last 6 months in that role before he retired. And then he moved to Brisbane, and then Dick Telford stepped in as head coach, track and field. They actually allowed me to be scholarship coach for 2 years. They extended it because I'd had this change midstream.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another really fortunate thing. Not only did both Pat and Dick coach me, but they were my mentors when I was learning about coaching. So while I was scholarship coach, I had a little local squad, Canberra squad, and I was also responsible for Heather Turland, who was a marathon runner living in Bowral, and Glenn Stojanovic, who unfortunately passed away, but he was a really talented middle distance runner. So they were my sort of more elite athletes that I was responsible for a period of time. But after I had babies, it was just the same reason that I didn't really want to go training at 5 p.m. of an afternoon. It was the same reason why it wasn't practical to be a coach, because that's when you meet your squads. And I made my family my priority.
Yeah.
So the coaching really dropped away, and I stayed as team manager for the ACT cross-country team, which is how I met you way back then. And my coaching was more restricted to just when I eventually went back teaching, what I was doing with the school athletics and cross-country programs.
Yeah, because I remember in 1998, I'd qualified for national schools cross country, and I knew nothing about running at all, other than I'd jump on the school treadmill and I'd run pretty much 6K as fast as I could, like 3 or 4 times a week. And then one of the boarding house tutors,
It was probably David Gates.
I was Cam Kasogolus, actually, who ended up being an Olympic rowing coach.
Yes,
he sort of put us in touch. And I remember, so you were the first Olympic track and field runner that I ever knew. And I remember rocking up to the AIS, like not knowing anything about the sport at all. And I think it was a session of like 400, 300, 200. Yeah. I reckon I ran the first 400 as fast as I possibly could. It was super lactic, and probably struggled after that. But, because you're coaching generally like school age kids.
Yes, I think at that stage I still had my little local squad.
Which is pretty cool. Like when you think back now, you've got these 16, 17-year-olds being coached, or having somebody at the track like yourself who's, still actively competing. At that stage, been to 2 Olympics and would go to one other. Like it was, I was buzzing. So you definitely had a massive impact on me and me, I guess, continuing running sort of after high school.
Oh, that's good. It's good to know. Yeah. I mean, the reason I stopped coaching Heather Turland was because after I had Riley, we were both trying to qualify for the Atlanta Olympics, and that was actually becoming a bit tricky. And she wanted to qualify for the 10K, even though she'd run a marathon at that stage. So coach and athlete trying to qualify for the 10K. So basically after Atlanta, we sort of said, I think it's better. And she'd already looked into what she could do because she was thinking along the same lines.
Yeah. One last question, just because you're obviously still heavily involved, like with the sport and AA, like how do we need to like improve the sport? Because I just see like there's this massive running boom at the moment. Like you go to park runs and that sort of thing, but then as you said earlier on, you go to an ACT inner club,
And there's no
and
one there.
there's more officials than there are athletes. Like, what do we need to do to improve?
I don't know. Australia has always had this problem of trying to be good at too many sports. I mean, outside the main football codes, there's so many other sports that are the next level down that are good, but not like some countries where they really focus on a few sports. We try and be good at everything. I don't know, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I I don't know how you entice people to a sport like track and field, which is basically an individual sport, and you have to work really hard and you don't always have this team around you. And I think, is that why we never get huge numbers in track and field? Because it's not a team sport? I don't know. And there's been attempts to try and make it more of a team sport, but it's an individual sport. And even it's different to swimming. Swimming's an individual sport, but at least they're all training in the same location at the same time. As for just running itself, when I first started running, the depth of men ahead of me in any race was there. If I was running today as fast as I was back then, but in today's races, I'd be coming in the top few of most races because there's just no depth. Why do people no longer, they just want to be recreational runners, and some will train, but not as a priority. I don't know why. I don't know why that changed. Is there just other options now? Road cycling has definitely taken off. I think the number of people out there in Lycra on very expensive road bikes has boomed. And maybe that's where the more elite or the top bunch is. I don't know, but I haven't got the answers. So.
No, neither do I. Well, thank you so much. It's been great catching up. And as I said at the start, like congratulations on a phenomenal career. I feel like you were a bit of a trailblazer in terms of competing after having kids, but also competing like into your 40s, whereas now it's very common, but back when you did it, and it would have been very easy, I'd imagine, for you not to have done that because you were the outlier at the time going, oh, well, nobody's competing after 40, but, you still did it and set the way for the others to follow.
But just to finish off, I would like to say how grateful I am for the opportunities I had. I mean, I know, yes, now they've got great footwear and great nutrition and probably even better sports science support than what we had. But I feel like I had so many opportunities. I had continual funding. I had great competition here in Canberra, week in, week out. There's things that I think I had that have disappeared a bit, and other things, I guess, have come in that are to the athlete's advantage to replace that. Smartphones, they can be so in contact with everything. Smartphones weren't even a thing till 2008. But I think, there's both probably advantages and disadvantages of that too. So, but I'm very grateful. I came across two amazing coaches in my career, both in a way by chance. They approached me. I didn't have to go knocking on their door. I had so many opportunities to race and travel and be a part of training groups. And I had a world cross-country championship every year, and I loved that.
Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. And now that you're back in Canberra, we'll have to catch up for a coffee.
Yes. Thanks, Brad. It's been great to have a chat.
Thanks to Precision Fuel and Hydration for partnering with us for this weekend episode. Chances are you're gearing up for a race yourself, but how dialed in is your race day nutrition? Precision Fuel and Hydration makes it simple with a free online planner. Visit precisionhydration.com and get your numbers today.